Hi, Matt Sexton here, Canterbury Rugby Academy Manager and National Resource Coach and Throwing Coach for the New Zealand Rugby Union. I'm here to talk to you today about line-out throwing. The areas that we're going to be covering off today are the elements of the line-out throw, the principles of accurate line-out throwing, some skills and drills applicable to getting better at it, and some common faults. First of all, looking at the various elements of the breakdown of the line-out throw, and I want to cover off firstly the grip on the ball. This has a major effect on the flight of the ball and the timing. So what I'll get Ben to do is just with his right hand or your dominant hand, if you can just place your hand on the ball where you would normally throw it from. And as you can see, with Ben's grip, his fingers are across the seam. What that does is it's a good practice, and that what it provides is a little bit of grip for wet conditions, where you can run your fingers across the seam as you release the ball to create nice spin on the ball. The thumb's also important, as that is placed along a seam as well, and aligns with the same principle as the fingers, and that it creates, as the thumb moves across the surface of the ball, if it's got a seam or a ridge to move across, it will help to create that nice tight spiral that we're after for consistency of flight. Another important aspect is how far the hand is on the back of the ball. If the hand's placed too far back towards the end of the ball, we can, on the release, sometimes the ball can fly rather upright, and what we're after is a nose first. So positioning of the hand on the ball, important to find a nice medium that would allow us to get the ball travelling nose first opposed to upright position. Another important aspect to consider is the stance. Having a good stance will allow us to be a balanced thrower and stop us from falling forward or backwards after throwing the ball or on the throw sequence. Two different ways to place the feet would be in a parallel position, which allows us good stability from a left to right, or consequently you could have a split stance, where that allows us good forward stability, but also good horizontal stability as well. When considering the upper body, it's important to, when we're looking at stance, to have a ball placed in a recoiled position. If Ben puts his hand forward and starts from anywhere forward of that position there, you give the opposition too many cues and too much indication of when the ball's about to throw. So having a short throwing sequence is important, and having the ball in a recoil position before throwing is probably best practice. To assist with good power in the throw, especially throwing down to the back of the line out, what we try and encourage is using large muscle groups. To do this with the stance, what we encourage our players to do if throwing down the back is to have their knees slightly bent. What this enables us to do is, as they extend, they impart force through their body and onto the ball. So knees in a slightly bent position, and as Ben would extend his legs, he creates power. The third aspect we're looking at is the release, and what we would encourage our line-out throwers to do is to start in a slightly squat position. As the ball is released, the player will stand up and finish nice and tall. Another thing to think about is making sure that the line of force is all in a straight line, so any form of rotation is not really encouraged. So as Ben moves forward into the throwing sequence and into the release of the ball, what we'll see is him coming up onto his toes, and the follow through, or the release of the ball following in the line that we want the ball to travel. So there you go. Just covering off on some of the principles of line-out throwing. The first one to consider, and is especially important for young throwers, is the idea of using large muscle groups to small muscle groups. And what we mean by that is making sure that the legs, the glutes and the abdominals start creating momentum for the thrower, and the arms just finish off. Unfortunately, there's a great deal of powers needed to get the ball accurately down to the back of the line out, so by utilising the legs and glutes and abdominals, we can create the power so that we don't have to concentrate on power with our arms and can concentrate on accuracy. Second principle we're talking about is, and a really important one for those that want to throw the ball in straight in the lineouts, is making sure that we keep everything in a straight line, and that's to do with the upper body mainly, but also with the follow through. So what we need Shota to do here is to make sure that in his throwing sequence that he has no form of rotation, and that on his follow through that his arms are pointing in the direction that he wants the ball to go to. Anytime that you have rotation, it can create variation in the throw, and we want to limit that as much as possible. So general rule of thumb is put everything in a straight line and it will travel that way. Another important principle to consider is the flight of the ball and making sure it's consistent. Anytime where the ball's not travelling in a tight spiral, it gains wind resistance and effectively can slow the speed of the ball through the air, which in turn will affect the timing of the jumper and the thrower. If the ball travels through the air and it's not nose first, again that will gain increased wind resistance, will affect the throw, and in windy conditions can cause it to go offline. So ideally what we would like is the ball to be travelling through the air nose first and with a tight spiral as it comes out of the hand. Fourth and last principle I'd like to consider is the idea of meeting at the apex. What that means in layman's terms is that the ball reaches the jumper at its full extension, and what that requires is good timing between the jumper and the thrower to ensure that the ball reaches at his full extension for the jumper. So for this to happen, a series of things have got to occur. Firstly, good consistent flight of the ball through the air and all the other principles that we've talked about previously. So we're just going to demonstrate now what that looks like. So here we've got some examples of some hooker initiated throws. Some of the key points to practice around this are making sure that the hooker is able to throw into space, and with a hooker initiated throw there's not really a target for the hooker to hit, so it's timing's pretty important, and being able to throw into space is an important skill to achieve this. A good drill to work on release of the ball and flight of the ball through the air is the one-handed throwing drill. With this, the throwers will adjust their grip to achieve a tight spiral and a nose first approach to the ball release. Often gives us good feedback on how the ball's travelling through the air, and our placement of our hand in relation to the seam and its flight through the air. Another good drill to work on is, again, a jumper initiated throw, and this tends to be more difficult for players in that throwing when a thrower wants to throw is often pretty easy, but having to go off an external cue like a jumper's movement is pretty difficult. And this is just breaking down that drill into a pretty simple form by having the catcher start the throwing initiation. A good drill to use for developing the large to small muscle groups is this drill with the medicine balls. So what we're trying to achieve here is the throwing sequence being initiated by the legs and the glutes and the core, and then the ball leaving their hands after it. Hopefully what happens here is that the arms aren't really generating the power, and all the power is being generated by the legs and glutes first, and the arms are just about direction and accuracy opposed to having to generate power. Fundamental to accurate throwing is a strong core and a powerful release. Of course, really important to maintain stability, but also to generate power. As we talked about large muscle groups, it's the second section of muscles that start imparting power on the ball. This is a really good drill to strengthen the core and a more specific throwing action. This drill is called the claybird shooting drill. What we're after here is a drill that essentially trains the throwers to throw to space rather than having a static target. So the person in the middle will throw the medicine ball up and the throwers will try to hit it. Again, trying to reach at the apex or hit it when it's at its peak. An extension on this is to use a smaller object like a medicine ball or a rugby ball to throw up. Again, a smaller target is harder to hit. With this drill, we're just trying to create a realistic throwing environment. So we've introduced the concept of an opposition jumper, and they're coming through and trying to put pressure on the thrower. Again, we're throwing to space, so we're not giving them a static target to throw to, and the opposition jumper is trying to knock the ball down. Common fault in throwing is with the follow through, the thrower's arms drop down. If we're abiding by the principles we talked about earlier, we want the follow through to be in line with where we want the ball to travel. By dropping the arms, what we create again is a situation of inconsistency where the ball can be released at a bad angle. A common fault again is throwing from an unbalanced platform. Ben's feet here are too close together and his release can be unstable due to his foot placement. So what we would encourage Ben to do is to move his feet a little bit further apart so that he has a more balanced platform to throw off. As mentioned, grip can also affect the accuracy of the throw. If the thrower's hand is too far back on the ball, as Ben's demonstrating here, the ball can fly too upright on release, and again it can be affected by wind resistance and also will affect the timing of the throw. As mentioned, grip can also affect the accuracy of the throw. What Ben's demonstrating here is a common fault among some players, is that not finishing tall on the throw. When a player finishes tall, they impart lots of power, but what Ben's showing here is a situation where his bum's dropping towards the ground and he's losing power. Rotation is a common fault among many players, and with rotation often we have inconsistency. What we encourage players to do is to keep everything in a straight line. Here Ben's demonstrating a follow through with rotation. His upper body and also his arms are moving across the centre line. In an ideal situation, we would hope that one side mirrors the other and that everything travels in a straight line.